All right, this is our second section for the executive branch. What is, I usually say, one of the most boring sections of all, but I've covered a lot of things beforehand, so I don't have to spend as much time on the bureaucracy here. Bureaucracy really isn't that hard. It's just there aren't many interesting stories to go along with it here, but it is the side of the executive branch that most Americans don't know too much about directly. They have. Now defined, there's hierarchy in it, with the structure that is done. Keyword here, specialization there. That's where you're going to see this there. It is supposed to be operated on the merit principle and behaves within personality. Please know that. As boring as that is, no, those are all the different things that must be part of the bureaucracy. There. So it is very important in the running of government. Most people don't like bureaucracies, but it's one of those necessary evils that has to be done in here. There's four basic types of bureaucracies in the United States. We have the different cabinet departments, we have independent executive agencies, independent regulatory agencies, and then government corporations. Your pass-fail quiz on bureaucracies is pretty much just who's in charge of what. Most of them are pretty easy to know who's in charge of what because their name gives away what they are supposed to do there. And you guess what the Environmental Protection Agency does, or the Department of Transportation, or the Department of Defense. So that's why most of them are pretty. There are a few that you have that are a little bit harder, but it's one of your easiest pass-fail quizzes. The reason for it is simply to go try to help you familiar when you are writing then about things. What are the four biggest that you see? And here, take the time to look at it. What have the lowest number on here? A lot of these are ones that you may not be thinking of with the lowest. So a lot of times when they're saying that we're going to cut the budget, where realistically when you look at the number of people that are working in the education or energy, if we were even to completely cut those out, that is just a fraction of what is in other departments such as defense or homeland security. Doesn't mean that those other departments aren't important, not at all in that way. I mean, those are really important, but this is where a lot of times when people say, well, if we can cut this out there budget-wise, there, some have a lot more. All right, there's 15 different departments there. Again, different names that you have. Ones that you do need to know off the top of your head are Department of State. Then there's things like Labor, Interior, Homeland Security, Justice that you have. So again, most of them, their name gives them away. Department of Agriculture there. Key thing that we have in our checks and balances, okay, that the heads of departments and bureaucracies, not the normal workers lower down, but the heads of them, so the top few people in that hierarchy, they are appointed by the president. They are political appointees, but they must be confirmed by the Senate, what is called the consent and advice. We're going to see that in the near future as Joe Biden has been picking his cabinet for times that we have. We have become a lot more partisan when it comes to voting against people that have been cabinet nominees, which you can see by the numbers that we have there. Historically, they're usually you have a big changeover after your first term. There, a lot of people serve 4 years. You might say, well, why? Well, it's kind of a job. You move to Washington, D.C. So usually at the midterms we have a big changeover, and then we have then at 4 years. So Donald Trump, who historically had a hard time, he did have some cabinet members that went the entire 4 years, or some that made it all till like 2 weeks before and resigned in the last week or two. But this is where he had a huge turnover in his office. All right, one department that you need to know, the name doesn't fully give it away, Department of Justice. The head of the Department of Justice is the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General is the top cop, not the top attorney. Okay, that top cop there, they are the person in charge of enforcing the laws. This is the president's enforcement arm that we have. So we have groups like the FBI that are involved, the DEA, the ATF, these different departments that are underneath the Department of Justice that are to enforce the laws. The Solicitor General is number 3 in the Department of Justice, behind the Attorney General and the Assistant Attorney General. Now, the Solicitor General is our top attorney. That is the person that represents the United States to the Supreme Court. The AP exam loves to have things about Solicitor General to make sure that you know that it is the attorney there for the side. History-wise, we've had a lot of different attorney generals. This is usually a lightning rod position that you have. You might remember from the Red Scare with Mitchell Palmer as the attorney general that was enforcing the Sedition Act. Robert Kennedy, who will be enforcing laws that were made for the Civil Rights Act as the attorney general under John F. Kennedy. Janet Reno is our longest served attorney general, who served both terms of President Clinton's and one of the most powerful Floridians in the history of the United States there. John Ashcroft when we had for anti-terror. In recent years we've had Jeff Sessions for President Trump and William Barr for those. Now, why is it such a high profile and lightning rod position? Every cabinet position is a position where you are working for the president, you're giving advice to it, but when something goes wrong, someone's got to be the scapegoat. So it's the head of the department. Well, the thing that's most likely to have for anything going wrong will be the Justice Department. There, people aren't paying attention to a whole lot of things for the Agriculture Department or Energy Department, so unless it's something major there. But the Justice Department, their enforcement of the laws is something that is done. So it is definitely a position. You better have a very thick skin if you are the Attorney General of the United States. All right, independent executive agencies. You have to break this apart. Independent. Independent means they're not supposed to be with either party. Will they sometimes have some partisanship? Yes, but usually they are not there. Executive means that the president still is the person like remotely in charge of them. They are not the level of a cabinet. There. So they're supposed to be free of politics. Again, that's the independent side that you have on here. NASA, National Science Foundation, the General Services Administration, the Small Business Administration are some examples of that. Now, General Services Administration is a very boring side. That's basically the quartermaster for the government. So they just handle all the acquisitions and everything for everybody else. But again, they're supposed to be free of politics. Independent, once again, they're supposed to be free of politics. Regulatory means that they are supposed to enforce the regulations that you have. So these are different bureaucracies that are supposed to try to enforce the laws. Again, they're supposed to be free of politics. Now, they are appointed by the president, again confirmed, but many of these things go beyond just that presidential's terms. So you'll have people that serve for Republicans and Democrats over time. Probably the most famous ones that you do need to know about are the Security and Exchange Commission for the stock market, Federal Reserve Board with our monetary policy, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Federal Communications Commission, Federal Trade Commission. You'll notice most of these you probably remember from your history class. Some of these were established during the New Deal after the Great Depression. National Labor Relations Board is a great example of that. All right, the fourth thing is government corporations. Now, there are certain things that we have that we see that are necessary in America today, but they're not going to be profitable. So private businesses don't want to do something that's not profitable, but we need it. Probably the best example that we have of this will be the post service there. Now you may say we don't need it because you got FedEx and UPS that are doing things, but there's a lot of things like that are done by the post office that FedEx and UPS are able to use that are done. Amtrak's another example of it for our passenger rail lines. It's not very profitable at all, and in some places not at all, to run a passenger rail line, but it's seen as something that is still necessary for some people, and especially some parts of the country like the Northeast. There. So where our freight rail lines are still run by private companies, Amtrak runs our passenger lines. So they do get taxpayer money to try to help them, but it helps for people. The TVA with Tennessee Valley Authority, another new deal that was started, but still today with the electricity there. Our satellites with Comstat that we have. Why do we have a bureaucracy? That's the main question to kind of be looking. We're going to go a lot deeper, but here's where what they have to do is they have to implement the laws is the thing that Congress writes. So they have to implement them. They have to take the details. Congress makes a broad law, and the bureaucracy has to go and do more with it. So now, here's this, and this, you notice this Max Weber. This is our political science side that we're going to. A bureaucracy will have a chain of command. There is a hierarchy there, where you think the military with a general. Well, this is where you will have Secretary of State in charge of the State Department. As you go down, then there are various other people that are there till you go down to ambassadors, and then you go below that to people that are working in here. Notice that this is underlined and bolded. If you are ever writing about bureaucracies, you're going to use the word specialization many times. The idea of a bureaucracy is they're experts on whatever they're doing there. A lot of the people that are working for them are not political appointees. They don't care. They're not supposed to care whether it's Republican, Democrat. They are working for the United States government here. So we hope that whoever's in part of the atomic agency knows a little bit about nuclear power there. So that's what the idea of specialization is. You're not there by who you know, but by what you know that you have. It's supposed to be impersonal. Sometimes we don't like that, but the idea that you have is that everybody's supposed to be equal. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. For the state level, what the bureaucracy a lot of people are most familiar with is the DMV. Okay, it doesn't matter whether you're rich and poor. Whether you have to have your driver's test in there. Some people make the joke that, yeah, they're impersonal. They treat everybody equal. They treat everybody like crap. Usually not that way, but this is where, again, you have that. There are certain rules that they have to follow. Again, that's part of the impersonal. The standard operating procedure there that'll say, and you'll end up dealing with a lot of bureaucracies. Those of you as students, you've kind of already seen this there. Our guidance office is a bureaucracy. Now, they're a little bit more friendlier than a normal bureaucracy, but there's certain things they'll tell you just can't do that. All right, this is what the rules are. That's the way that a bureaucracy is. The other thing that you'll probably write a lot of times will be merit. In order to move up in a bureaucracy, it's supposed to be that what is your skill. So you have certain jobs, you must have certain degrees, you must have certain experience. There may be tests you have to take there. And so you just can't get a job because of who you know there. This is to battle for history, going back to Andrew Jackson, and then later on when we will have in the late 1800s with the different political machines and where they were giving jobs for their supporters. So, or remember the spoil system. This is where for Andrew Jackson, it happened before him, but he increased a lot more. Once we will have for the political machines and how powerful they became in the late 1800s. After the assassination of James Garfield, President Arthur will push through and then make change. The biggest change he'll make is the Pendleton Act. It will get rid of patronage. Patronage is where you get your job because of who you know. There, friends, supporters will get certain jobs there. Again, and most bureaucracies today, except for the very top positions, the rest of them are apolitical, meaning they're not political. Your jobs are based on the merit system, what you have for time, your ability, your degrees that you have. The Hatch Act, we had this in the elections, but this is where it comes to for the bureaucracies. The Hatch Act is where if you are working for a bureaucracy, you cannot actively participate in election while you are on duty. Again, you can do it on your own time, but you cannot do it while you're on duty. And the 2020 election, this is where we had a lot of questions about where President Trump, some of the things that he did, was he forcing people to violate the Hatch Act, especially during the Republican convention, since it was done online. Some other vocabulary, no. Again, not exciting, but you need to know the OPM. The OPM is the Office of Personnel Management. Now, the rule of three. Please put stars, arrow bys this in your notes. Do you hear me, Sierra? Put this in your notes. The rule of three. Later on, we're going to have the rule of four. But the rule of three is whenever there's an opening in the bureaucracy, they will get their candidates from the Office of Personnel Management. So if you are wanting a job in the State Department, you apply with the Office of Personnel Management. They will then go through, when there's a job opening, they will go through all the resumes and everything else. They will pick 3 people that they have no idea who they are other than what the resumes are, and then send them to whoever has that job for the interviews. And they will actually do even sometimes lower interviews. It's a whole system. It takes a while sometimes to get some of those jobs. And then the person will then pick out of those 3 there. The rule of 4 is going to be something we're going to have later on with the Supreme Court. So rule of 3 is bureaucracies, rule of 4 is Supreme Court there. So, all right, general schedule rating. This is where when you are with the bureaucracy, you get paid by your job. Here we sort of have that with the education, not as much now in there where it used to be with time, but the military's that way that you have. Once again, standard operating procedure. There's certain rules that are followed. There is a thing called where you can have a supervisor discretion on some things in here. And this is where a lot of times when people say, when we have our Karens that say, I want to see your supervisor, well, this a lot of times comes from bureaucracies, not just with business that you have. All right, here's where this question, this is one that's from your reading in your book, but this is where people look and say, oh, the government's grown so much. We've had so much for the bureaucracies. There's some truth and some hasn't, but overall we have had a growth, but most of the growth has actually occurred, at least with the number of people on the state level. But as we're going to find when we get to federalism, part of this is because the federal government has shifted the burden to the states. We have had new bureaucracies like Homeland Security, one of those biggest is a creation since after 9/11 that we have. But this is where the reason why that you look at that, a lot of times people, when there's a problem, they say, how are we going to solve this? Okay, well then with government, well, we need to have some new organization to regulate it, which is a new bureaucracy that you have. Question, which definitely is right now for going on, who's going to regulate big tech? Okay, that we have. All right, and the executive branch there, I said we'd cover this here. It's something that's real important but very dry. The White House staff, the president is able to pick some of his closest advisors here. One of the most important people in the White House is the chief of staff. The chief of staff is pretty much the person that is organizing everything for the president, who he's going to see or she see, where they're going to go, what are going to be the priorities, because the president cannot micromanage everything. So they have to have a chief of staff that they really trust, but other people have to also trust who the chief of staff is here. President Trump had gone through several chiefs of staff. His first one was Rich Previs but he has in the last 2 years gone through multiple chiefs of staff as it's had a problem. There's a lot of agencies that are right under the president there that are part of the bureaucracy there. The National Security Council we will have in our security section that we're doing, and this is where we will have some of our top advisors, military, economic, because that is part of our security that we have. The Council of Economic Advisors, Office of Management and Budget, these are all things that are there under the executive office of the president. The OMB should sound familiar to you because in a bill comes to law, they are the ones that kind of rival the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, because if the president wants to propose something or wants Congress to pass something, he will have his own people crunch the numbers and say how much it's going to cost. All right, for our third time this year, we have iron triangles. We started out with interest groups. We then went to congressional subcommittees. Now we have bureaucracies. Now, the Iron Triangle is a sub-government. We have the 3 different ones that we have. We can also, you'll hear issue networks when you throw in other groups like law firms and think tanks and stuff like that doing research on that subject. But traditionally, the Iron Triangle is the side. So here's where what we'll end up practicing from here is to think, when there is some sort of issue, what are the different interest groups that are involved? That's why we had the interest group pass-fail quiz. What committees and subcommittees in Congress are going to be involved on this issue, where they have hearings on it, they're passing laws and they're debating the laws on that issue. And then the bureaucratic agencies is where we are today. So what bureaucratic agency is supposed to implement and enforce that law? And then how are they involved with the committees? And how are they involved with the interest groups? And what do they have? That's where all of these are interconnected for things on here. So they are supposed to enforce the laws that Congress passes. And we're going to have an entire section on implementation. So Congress passes a law saying we're going to have clean air, but how are we going to enforce it? How much pollutants are we going to allow? We're not going to just shut down all our factories. So what are we going to do? They're supposed to help with constituents' complaints. So you complain that there's too much smoke coming from a factory. You then go to the EPA, and the EPA will then try to make sure is where that factory is coming from. Is it following the laws that are under the Clean Air Act? There. Now their budget is controlled by Congress. So this is where, if you are a bureaucratic agency, you don't want to tick off Congress because you may lose your job or other things that you have that they can fight back. Again, the power of the purse that Congress has then over the bureaucracy. They're supposed to be impersonal in regulation. Again, that's where bureaucracy is supposed to be impersonal. It doesn't matter what the factory, who it's owned by, or what it does. Is it following the laws? That's the whole thing. But they're supposed to be experts, so that's specialization that you have. So you notice in here, impersonal, specialization. They have. So if they're working for the Environmental Protection Agency, they should have some sort of thing for environment. Meanwhile, we're going to have the Department of Labor that might be involved in that factory. That's another bureaucratic agency and another iron triangle that you have. We'll have the Department of Commerce that is going to be involved with that, because they each have different areas they're fighting and different interest groups and who they're going to here. And this is where it gets deep into different issues and who's involved and who's on what side that we have in here. All right, I've mentioned this word a couple different times. This is where you'll have for your writing. Congress writes a law, the bureaucracy has to implement it. So Congress says we're going to have the Clean Air Act. The bureaucracy is the one that has to set the rules. A lot of the little rules are those that are done and that basically as part of executive order, since they're working under the president in here. That's where the Federal Register has it. But here's where a lot of details come. Now, here's where we have some problems with this. Who's really in charge of things? Okay, is for a power plant in the Crystal River that's right there on the Gulf of Mexico. So is the Department of Energy in charge of it? Is the Environmental Protection in charge of it? So who is? Well, yeah, they all are. And who powers more, and who's doing what for what section in there, and then how much power does each group have on here? So that's part of the flaws that we have in here. Now, checks and balances, and this is where your iron triangles come in. How do they curb it? First thing, hearings. Remember I said when you're talking about Congress, committees, words you're always going to write is hearings. They can have hearings. So if enough people are complaining about the amount of smoke that's coming out of the Crystal River power plant, they can have a hearing on what's happening here and call in the bureaucracy and say, are you enforcing what there is? Again, the budget. If they say you're supposed to enforce it or not, they can start cutting their budget there. So they can, again, the power of the purse. Congress can go and the bureaucracy say, listen, we're doing this. You didn't give us enough direction. So they can rewrite the law to give them more direction. Also with appointments that consent and advise. So the president appoints someone that maybe is for the Department of Interior that's supposed to be with national parks that, let's say, used to work for an oil lobbyist there. Then they may not allow that that you have. What are some reasons that implementation of programs fail? First of all, sometimes it's just bad in the beginning. Now here's a problem with government, is sometimes government won't admit what they're wrong. And this is where people will say that we need to have a business idea when it comes to government there. Because if you're in business and something's not working, you stop it because you can't lose money. But government sometimes will just keep going. An example of that some of you have seen in your lifetime are some of the state tests that we have had in Florida. Sometimes the problem is what is the actual laws trying to say? So lack of clarity. An example of this will be Title IX, because when Congress wrote Title IX that men and women were supposed to be equal in opportunities there for colleges. Well, when we looked at scholarships for things, college football, there were 85 athletes that got scholarships. The sport that went with it was volleyball. Well, volleyball only had 11. So where they're supposed to say the number of actual athletes get the same number of scholarships there, or are we talking about then with sports? So when there's something that, so that's where again the Congress sometimes, and that's where sometimes they can rewrite it. Lack of resources. This is the major problem we have. You're supposed to enforce the law, but you can't. We found a few years ago about where we had some problems with bad milk, and we found that there were 2 inspectors from the entire states of Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin to visit every single dairy they had. So they couldn't there, and so this is where they did not have enough resources to enforce the law. Administrative differences. We're going to see that in the very near future, because will the people that Biden has on his cabinet have the same direction as those that President Trump had? So suddenly the direction of that bureaucracy might be a little bit different there, or in some cases very dramatic. I made the case for the Interior Department. I believe that Trump's Secretary of the Interior, so in charge of national parks and public lands, did used to be a lobbyist in an oil firm in here. That probably won't happen under Joe Biden. And here's the problem that we have in this fragmentation that you'll see. What groups, who's in charge? A great example of this, of all kinds of bureaucracies, both state and national, will be in Crystal River. So as I'm driving my boat around in Crystal River, I've got to make sure that I am aware of manatees, because they are the precious things in Citrus County. So who's enforcing it? Well, there's all kinds of groups depending on where I'm at. It could be the Citrus County Sheriffs. It can be the National Parks System, because we have the Crystal River Preserve. That part of that water is under it there. It can be the Fish and Wildlife Service. It can be the Coast Guard there. There are actually, I think, 9 different bureaucracies that have some sort of regulation over Kings Bay area of Crystal River. So who's in charge? A lot of times it depends on what you're doing and where you're at there. So that's where, again, some of the problems that they fall. Now, how are they done? This is another part for your writing in here. How do you force people to do things? And this is where you see the stick or carrot. So there's 2 ways to make it. You try to convince people to do the right thing, that's the carrot, or you tell people you're going to do the right thing or else, and that's the stick. Sometimes you try to use a combination of it, and depends on what the issue is. So the carrot is the incentive. If you give a tax deduction for something, so we want people to get more efficient homes. So if you give a tax deduction, if people get modern windows instead of older ones that don't let out as much heat there. Or for a company, you give them a subsidy. You want them to build more of a certain product, but it's not profitable. Well, if you build it, we'll actually pay you. It's like welfare for companies. But that's what China had done when it came to solar panels there. The incentive is what we call sin taxes. If I don't drink anything, I don't pay any taxes on alcohol. Same thing like tobacco. So that's where you have it. So that's this. Authoritative, that's where you have the rules. You'll have a fine. You can revoke their license, put them out of business, things like that. Some things is to have training for something, capacity idea there. So more information, more training. A lot of times people, they just need to know how to do something, and once they know how. Another way is just basically get people to change their habits there. Doesn't always work, but sometimes it does in there. The idea of just say no was one part of it. That didn't work as well, but what ended up happening was, and some of this was information and training, but when it comes for drunk driving, where in the early 80s, it was a lot of jokes that were made, but between the authoritative and fines getting a lot higher, and today, I mean, it's just seen as uncool if you let someone leave your house or leave a restaurant and you know that they are impaired. So where in the 80s, it was just kind of laugh about it, hope that they get home, and hope they don't get pulled over. So That's why for implementation, a lot of times it's a combination of these different things. It's been a while talking about this, so make sure you know about it. Okay, Sierra? All right, quick reminder on this, and this is where we get back. Keep everything simple. So, policymakers, who makes policies? It is Congress, it is the presidents, it's the court. How does Congress? They pass laws. How they tax, how they spend, they direct it. The president and how the bureaucracies will make the rules. Executive orders can do this. Executive memos are like executive orders in many ways there of how to go about something. How do they implement it, or what do they not implement? The courts can make it for a decision. Again, they have to be supported then by usually the president, such as Brown versus Board compared to Worcester versus Georgia in here. Now, what's the problem when courts make policy? This is where a lot of people look. The Supreme Court, they are not directly by the people. They are selected by the president and then appointed by, or then confirmed by the Senate. So that's where they are not, and usually for the federal court, they have a life term, so they don't face consequences. All right, government regulation. How much should government do things in here? Historically, governments got more involved in the late 1800s. The progressive era will have a little bit less in the 1920s, come back in the 30s with more, and we've kind of gone back and forth over time. Why have more regulation? Why have less regulation? Here, there's various reasons for both that you have, and again, something that you'll write. Less regulation, rule or word to know there is deregulation. There. Comes to safety, there, personal protection, environmental protection for more regulation. This is why, like I mentioned, the EPA and other groups that are going to be fighting on that side for it. Meanwhile, less regulation. If you're a company, you don't want to have this there. Consumers, sometimes they'll make the cost of things go up there. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Okay, and this is where the capitalistic idea that you have in there, that if you just let the market take place in here. A lot of times there's too much red tape. There. Problems you have sometimes with the regulation that you have is that foreign countries, if they don't have the same regulation, you're not on an equal playing field, so you're not going to be able to sell your product as easily as a product coming from Mexico there. So this is where the arguments that you have, a lot of that is in economics that you'll kind of look at that. We'll come back to some of this in our economics section too. All right, who is in charge? And this is where, once again, we're coming back to checks and balances. So, the president, this is how the president has the control. And again, this is both iron triangles, checks and balances in there. The president is the person that appoints the head of these different departments and bureaucracies. The president can reorganize and refocus what they have and what is going to be the perspective. The president can issue executive orders there. Again, for empowerment, we had another thing. The president can't truly not spend the money, but can he kind of shift money around and maybe do things a little bit different than what Congress initially intended and get away with it for a while on the chat. Meanwhile, for Congress, once again, you see the word hearings. If they find something that's wrong, they can call in the bureaucracy and hold hearings there. They can deny the president someone that's been appointed to a certain position. Biggest thing of all, and again, you're writing, Congress has the power of the purse. They control the money. So if the bureaucracy is not doing what they want, they can basically not bribe them but take away their money that they have in here. It's kind of like for some of you, you do things for your parents, not because you want to, but because, well, you have to, because they control the purse strings. Rewriting the legislation with more detail, something Congress can also do there. All right, miscellaneous things for bureaucracy here. One of the phrases that we've had, and this is where a lot of this has happened in the state of Florida a time, but the idea that we have for more privatization there. A lot of people say that the bureaucracy is the fourth branch of the government. They don't do things efficiently. There are positives and negatives to it. A positive is a lot of times a private company can do things a lot more efficient. A negative is sometimes they're not doing what's best. There. This is where the argument is sometimes made for schools. All right, a school that's a private school, then they need to try to make money. That might be their number one thing. Have the picture there for garbage here in Citrus County. We have right now we have our pick of our garbage is private. It means the cost is probably less a year for me where I have my company that picks up my garbage on Wednesday there, than if I was to pay it in taxes. But it also means that there's 3 different times that garbage trucks are driving up and down my street, 3 different days that people leave their garbage out in there, instead of just one day and one centralized thing that you have in there. So there again, there's positives to all of it. All right, how to kill an iron triangle. One way to make it is, instead of it being a bureaucracy, make it more of an independent agency, which again is supposed to be free of politics that you have. An example of that is nuclear power. They wanted to make sure that we did not have this be a Republican-Democrat issue on nuclear power. Bureaucracies and unions in here, and this is a question that we kind of look at today, where unions have been dying out in industry, they have grown in government. So, should a government employee be in a union? Again, they're supposed to work for the people, so, and this is where all 3 of these issues that you have are things that are in Chapter 14, so make sure you read with those. So, bureaucracy questions, a lot of times, usually this is where we're going to have our iron triangle questions in here. And notice different things. Rulemaking, bureaucratic discretion. That's where that phrase is meaning where the bureaucracies can decide how the law is going to be done. Notice oversight there, power of the purse. Okay, you're explaining there, and so that's a checks and balances, iron triangles type question that you have in here. Here's a question, I showed it before, but now, how is the president the chief bureaucrat or the chief administrator and things? So, and then this is where that part's more of a checks and balance there. So, yeah, the president is to implement the law or administrator or enforce it. So they can kind of choose in this way. Explain how each of the following limit the president's influence on policy making. Civil service employees. This comes down to, again, that word merit. Again, except for the top people, they are not working for a president. They were not working for President Trump. They're not working for President Biden. They are working for the United States of America. So this is where they are supposed to try to stay as non-political. They got their job not by who they supported, but by what they know. That specialization and what they know and how they've earned it over time, the merit side that you have on this. The divided government, you can see that policy making. All right, what's a focus? Like as we switch from a Republican to a Democrat for president, the heads of those bureaucracies are going to be changing some. So Congress, which if it's divided on there, are they going to have, if it's Republican control there, which we don't have right now, but very well could in the near future. Then how is that going to make some differences in there? You see here executive orders, and then for C, explain the importance of the following implementation of public policy. Bureaucratic discretion, once again. Iron triangles, issue networks, so these different voices that are made along the way. The structure of the federal bureaucracy in here that you have. This is where the idea that they had all that Max Weber stuff that's supposed to be hierarchy, supposed to have your standard rules that you have. The idea of merit, specialization in there. A says, describe one key characteristic of the merit system. This one's actually pretty funny because the key thing for the merit, you could actually say, well, the people have to have the right merit or the right job, so you can actually rework this in here. C, once again, we have something that part of this is checks and balances, as well as the iron triangle side of this. Here's where we have some different agencies. So what is the EPA in charge of in there, and how does it do control of this? C, describe 2 ways which Congress ensures federal agencies follow the legislative intent. So that's a checks and balance idea that you have in here.